Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today's video is going to be about what is a really historically significant camera, though most of you today have probably never heard of it or even seen one of these. Today's video is going to be about the Canonflex camera, and this particular one is the R2000. So of course everyone knows about Canon today. Canon is the foremost maker of professional quality SLR cameras. But back when this camera was made back in 1960, Canon was really struggling. They were competing against Nikon at the time, and Nikon had just introduced its F series SLR camera, which was a home run. It was a runaway bestseller, and Nikon couldn't make enough cameras to satisfy the market. And Canon decided that they had the technology and ability to make a competing camera, and they poured a lot of resources into the design and manufacture of the Canonflex camera. They had hoped to be able to make this into a complete system camera to compete head-to-head with Nikon, but unfortunately they did not, and the Canonflex system was rather short-lived before it was eventually discontinued altogether, and resources put over toward developing the Canon F1, which became their first real professional SLR camera. Let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the Canonflex and why Canon had hoped this would be a professional model camera and why it did not succeed. So overall, it's basically a 35mm SLR camera, as you can see, but with a rather odd design. It doesn't look like anything else which was on the market then. It was completely unique. It didn't have it shared nothing with the other SLR cameras which other makers were putting out. It was really a one-of-a-kind and interesting thing, and that's probably one of the reasons why it didn't succeed. It was just it was trying to take a lot of the old and the new and a few unknown things and putting it all together in a single package and putting it on the market and hoping it would gain traction and become popular, which it didn't. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look starting at the top here. And of course I always start on this side here, and we have the rewind knob with a pop-out lever and a roller tip, which is a good feature for rewinding the film. If you lift this up, you can see this dial here with the windows on it and a couple of knurled spots underneath. And by turning these, you can set the film type and the film speed. Now these are just reminders. They have nothing to do with the operation of the camera. It's just when you are loading film into the camera, you look at the film, you see if it's color or black and white or infrared or whatever, and you program one of the windows to show it. And the other one you would program the film speed. And this allows you to look at the numbers and remember what kind of film you have loaded in the camera. Nowadays, cameras are digital, they don't need this, and earlier film cameras before digital had DX programming. They did all that without you even having to look at the film. But in the old days, if you wanted to remember what kind of film you had, and this is very important if you're shooting more than one camera, you need some way to know. Sometimes I have old cameras which I loaded film into and I can't remember what film it is or what speed it is. And that pretty much, if you don't know that, you can't really shoot the camera. So this is a very important feature. Next we have the pentaprism, and on this camera there's a release lever for the pentaprism. You push it down like so till it clicks and you can slide it off. Now this is was the big feature for the Canonflex camera, and when Canon designed this camera, they designed a number of accessory finders which would slide in place of the original finder. And these were things like a magnifying finder, which made this camera suitable for things like microphotography, or a sports finder, which would make it more usable for sports photography, and even a waist level finder. Such was available on other cameras of the time. Unfortunately, none of these finders were ever produced. The only one you can get is the one which originally came with the camera. Canon killed the Canonflex camera before the accessories were ever produced. Over here we have the film counter dial located under this glass window. We have the shutter release button here with a locking lever, which allows you to lock the shutter button. The shutter button accepts a standard cable release, so you can use pretty much any cable release or an accessory self-timer. Here we have the shutter speed dial, and this is very similar to the dial which you find on the Canon 7 rangefinder camera, which oddly, a lot of people think this camera is kind of a more advanced version of the Canon 7 camera, but actually the Canonflex cameras are an older design than the Canon 7. So you might actually say that the Canon 7 is more based on the Canonflex than the other way around. It's really weird, but I believe the Canon 7 was introduced in 1961, which was a year after the Canonflex R2000 came out. So kind of a funny thing. But a lot of the rangefinder features you see in this camera, the shape of the top cover and the shape of the body, and the fact that it has, it has the same flash sync bracket which you would use on the Canon 7 or Canon P rangefinder cameras. Moving to the front of the camera, we have the self timer here, and you simply, you can turn this like so. It pops out and pops down, and I don't really like this design so much. The ones which have a vertical lever, you can kind of see the lever moving from a distance. And this round lever you can't really see. If you're at any distance, you can't actually see this turning because it's just a metal ring. If you pop it open, maybe you can see it a little bit, but even so, you can't see it so clearly. So this was kind of a bad feature to have on these cameras. And self-timers in those days were, this was the only way you could take a selfie in those days. And even in 1960, a selfie was kind of a popular thing. That's why they put self-timers on all these cameras. And this one here is just a bad design. Above the self-timer, we have this bracket here under the R2000 nameplate, and this is for attaching a coupled light meter. And what you do is you attach the light meter here, and it couples to the shutter speed dial, and this allows you to kind of couple the meter. And as you turn the shutter speed, you can see the indicator moving in the light meter and recommending an aperture setting for that speed. Over here we have the lens, and this is the big drawback to the Canonflex system, was this dual ring system with you program the aperture, and there's kind of a aperture limiter ring here. This is kind of similar to what came on the old preset lenses made by Pentax and such. And this design was already obsolete when Canon made this camera in 1960, so that's one of the reasons that this camera didn't succeed. This lens system and the diaphragm system was already too old to compete. Moving to the bottom, we have another feature which makes this camera unique, and that is the trigger winding system. The trigger winding system was popular in the old rangefinder cameras. Camera made a VT rangefinder camera which featured only a trigger winder, and they made a trigger winder base plate adapter for a lot of their other cameras. This was a very simple and fast system which allowed you to take quick backup shots. It was really cutting edge in the early 1950s, but by 1960 it was no longer a thing. And also, by having the system in the bottom of the camera, it made it impossible to adapt a motor drive system. And Nikon had introduced a motor drive system with its S3 and SP rangefinder cameras. Those are quite expensive if you find one nowadays. But these same systems could also be used on the Nikon F. And the F36 motor drive, which Nikon M36, F36, turned out to be a very reliable and good working portable motor drive system. And of course, it was a very important and useful feature for professional photographers, and it was obviously the future of professional photography. And not being able to put one on the Canon, the Canonflex R2000 and such, that pretty much just doomed the camera from being competitive in the future. Besides the trigger wind on the bottom, we have a 1/4-inch tripod socket. We have a release button on the bottom, which is like an SLR camera instead of the release ring on the top like they have on the rangefinder camera. And we have this release lever which opens the film door on the back. It's a little bit like the Canon rangefinder cameras, but it requires just a single mechanism instead of the two mechanisms. On the rangefinder cameras, you also have a second lever here. You have to unlock the bottom and then release the second lever to pop open the film door. This one here you can do with just a single movement, and then it just pops shut like so. So that's a big advancement. The viewfinder on the back of the camera is very nice. It's very large. It has a large field of view. It allows you to use this viewfinder if you're wearing glasses. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow for the addition of diopters. It's not threaded on the back. It doesn't have a dovetail or anything. I don't know that Canon made accessory diopter lenses for this camera. Possibly they did. They might have had some way to figure out how to put them on here. But more than likely that was something that they were going to add with a more advanced finder later on down the road. And of course these finders never hit the market. The lenses on these cameras, the super kinematic lenses, there weren't a lot of these lenses made. This is the standard 50mm f1.8 lens, and it dismounts just like an FD lens. And as I'm looking at this lens, I don't know if you can see as I'm turning it here, it has a really distinct gold or yellow cast to the glass. And that indicates that this is a thorium glass, or what some people call lanthanum glass. And this is also what Canon called a rare earth kind of glass. This was a very expensive and high quality glass, which was used to limit chromatic aberration at large apertures. That is, to keep all the colors focused on the same spot. At wider apertures, the colors range a little bit, and they don't focus in exactly on the same spot. Some focus more closely than others. And if you try to shoot color film with these old lenses which don't have rare earth glass, you can get red fringing on the photos because the red is not focused on the same spot as the other colors. By using this kind of glass, chromatic aberration was reduced or eliminated. And you can tell that this, despite the fact that the engineering of this lens was obsolete, the quality of the optics was not. This was a very high precision and high quality lens when it was introduced, and would be a wonderful performer even today. And it mounts on the camera just like the old FD lenses. There's a red mark. You turn the ring as far as it will go to the left, and then you just line up the red dot here with this notch on the top, and then turn it to the right until the lens is locked in place. So who would want a camera like this nowadays? Probably, for people who love Canon cameras and are really loyal to the brand, this is a really interesting camera because, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's a significant piece of Canon's history. This is the link between the rangefinder and modern SLR camera. It also has a lot of features which were the last of its kind, like the trigger winder on the bottom and the rather odd round self-timer system. And also this pentaprism system, which was really unique. It's a really quirky camera, one which you don't see a lot of, and one which I don't come a lot across in good condition even here in Japan. I was lucky to find this one in really remarkable condition with the lens cap and the original leather case, which is really hard to find for these. This is a much better case than what they put the Canon 7 inside. The lenses which came for this camera, the Super Kinematic, the 50mm f1.2 is a really wonderful lens. The 58mm 1.2 is probably my favorite lens, one of my favorite Canon lenses. It's a super performer, and a lot of people have adapted it to later or digital cameras. There was a 35mm f2.5 lens. I don't have any experience with that. I've never shot with one. And there was a 100mm f2, which was a superb lens, and which a lot of people today, are really interested in, collectors and shooting photographers alike. This is a really interesting camera, and the best thing about this camera, and something which I can't say for a lot of other cameras at the time, is that though the features and such, it turned out to be a dud when it came to being a professional quality camera, the mechanism and internal parts were indeed professional quality. This is an incredibly reliable and hard to break camera. I've come across maybe 20, 25 of these cameras over the years. I never actually had to discard one because I couldn't fix it. Pretty much all of them just require a little bit of cleaning and they are ready to use. And with other cameras of this era, with the exception of maybe Nikon's F and their rangefinder cameras, that's a rare thing. A large percentage of the old Pentax and Minolta and whatever rangefinder cameras, I get them and they don't work and they're too much trouble to fix. And so I generally just, if I can't use them for parts, I throw them away. But that's not the case with the Canonflex cameras. They almost always work. And the most which I need to do with them is clean out the lens elements and the focusing screen and stuff like that, and they're good to go for another 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So if you're looking for a unique, reliable, interesting camera with excellent lenses, and which you'll probably be the only person on the block to have one, and the Canonflex camera is a good choice for you. The last feature on this, which I probably should have mentioned at first, was the 1/2000th top speed, which was the fastest speed you could get in an SLR camera of those days, and when it was being designed, it was the fastest maximum speed of any 35mm camera. So that's another thing which didn't come out on Nikon until they introduced their F2 model more than a decade after this camera was introduced. But anyway, the battery in my Canon camera, which I'm shooting this video with, is getting a little bit low, and I don't want to be cut off before the video finishes. So I'm going to be listing this camera for sale in my online store soon. You'll probably see it in my Etsy store tonight or tomorrow. If you'd like to visit my stores and see what cameras I have available, I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. I've got more interesting cameras like this one on the way, and I plan to be doing videos about them. If you'd like to see these, please subscribe. As always, I'm trying to get more people interested in vintage and film photography, and if you click the like button, that helps. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.